2 years ago I survived a horrific incident on stage, tonight I make my return. The velvet curtains part with a whisper, revealing the darkened stage beyond. As I step forward, the floorboards creak beneath my feet, an eerie echo in the empty theater. My heart pounds, each beat reverberating through my chest as if amplified by the cavernous space around me. I pause at center stage, willing my trembling legs to stay steady. It's been 2 years since I last stood in this spot. 2 years since the night that shattered my world and left me a broken shell of the man I once was. The memories flood back unbidden, as vivid and horrifying as the moment they were seared into my mind. I close my eyes, fighting back the images, but they come anyway, a tide of terror that threatens to drown me. The roar of the crowd. The heat of the stage lights beating down. My voice ringing out clear and strong as I delivered my lines. It was opening night of our revival of The Phantom of the Opera, and everything was going perfectly. The audience was captivated, the cast was in top form. I felt invincible, riding high on the rush of a flawless performance. Then came the fateful moment, the grand chandelier crash. A pinnacle of theatrical spectacle, it never failed to elicit gasps of awe from the crowd. The massive prop was rigged to plummet from the ceiling in a shower of shattering crystal, stopping just short of the stage in a stunning illusion of destruction. But on that night, something went terribly wrong. I heard it first, a deep groan of straining metal, audible even over the swelling orchestra. My eyes darted upward, widening in horror as I saw the chandelier swaying ominously. In that split second, I knew with sickening certainty that this was no illusion. Time seemed to slow as I watched death descend from above. The chandelier tore free from its moorings in an explosion of splintering wood and snapping cables. It plunged toward the crowd below, a glittering harbinger of doom. I opened my mouth to scream a warning, but no sound emerged. I was frozen, helpless, as 2 tons of metal and crystal crashed into the packed theater seats. The cacophony was deafening, shattering glass, splintering wood, and the agonized screams of the audience all blending into a hellish symphony. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape, trampling those who had fallen in their desperation to flee. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes from the nightmarish scene unfolding before me. The front rows had been obliterated, seats crushed to kindling beneath the chandelier's bulk. Those who hadn't been killed instantly writhed in agony, impaled by shards of crystal or pinned beneath twisted metal. Blood ran in rivulets down the sloped floor, pooling at the foot of the stage. The coppery scent of it filled my nostrils, so strong I could taste it on my tongue. Still I couldn't move, couldn't even blink as I stared in slack-jawed horror. A child's plaintive wail cut through the din, snapping me from my daze. Without conscious thought, I leapt from the stage and waded into the carnage. I pulled people from the wreckage with strength born of desperation, heedless of the glass that sliced my palms to ribbons. For hours I worked alongside the rescue crews, digging through the rubble for survivors. But as the night wore on, we found fewer living and more dead. By dawn, the death toll had climbed to 37, with scores more injured. I emerged from the theater as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, clothes soaked with blood, both my own and others. My throat was raw from shouting, my body battered and aching. But the physical pain paled in comparison to the anguish that gripped my soul. In the days that followed, I learned the gruesome details. A faulty weld had given way, sending the chandelier plummeting with lethal force. It was a freak accident, they said. No one was to blame. But I knew better. I was to blame. I had been the star, the one whose name drew crowds to the theater night after night. If not for me, those people would never have been there. Their blood was on my hands. The nightmares began almost immediately. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that stage, watching helplessly as death rained down. I relived the horror again and again, waking in a cold sweat with the victim's screams echoing in my ears. Sleep became my enemy. I would go days without rest, fueled by a cocktail of caffeine and desperation. When exhaustion finally claimed me, the dreams were there waiting. Sometimes I was crushed beneath the chandelier myself, feeling my bones splinter as the weight pressed down. Other times I was trapped in the audience, unable to escape as the crystal shards sliced into me. But the worst dreams were the ones where I saved them. Where I found the voice to shout a warning, or the strength to catch the chandelier before it fell. For in those blissful moments between sleep and waking, I believed it had all been just a bad dream. The crushing return to reality was almost more than I could bear. I withdrew from the world, sequestering myself in my apartment. The very thought of stepping onto a stage again filled me with paralyzing terror. I ignored the calls from my agent, from casting directors eager to capitalize on the notorious tragedy. The newspapers dubbed me the Phantom Survivor, and suddenly I was more famous than ever. The irony was not lost on me. Reporters camped outside my building, hungry for an exclusive with the reclusive star. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to so much as open the curtains lest I catch a glimpse of the outside world. Food deliveries piled up outside my door. I couldn't bear to face even the delivery drivers. In my isolation, I began to see things. Shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Flickering shapes in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just fatigue, just my mind playing tricks. But in the dark watches of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It started small at first. Items not where I'd left them. The faint sound of whispers when no one was there. A chill in the air even in the heat of summer. I might have dismissed it as signs of my deteriorating mental state, if not for what came next. I awoke one night to find my bedroom filled with a soft, ethereal glow. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them, translucent figures scattered about the room. Men, women, children, all bearing the gruesome injuries of that fatal night. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their faces masks of accusation and sorrow. I scrambled back against the headboard, a scream lodged in my throat. This was a dream, it had to be. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. But when I opened them again, the spirits remained. One by one they approached the bed. Spectral hands reached for me, icy fingers brushing my skin. Their touch sent jolts of agony through my body, the pain of crushed limbs, of impalement, of slow suffocation. Every hurt they had suffered, I felt as if it were my own. I begged for mercy, pleaded for forgiveness. But they were beyond such things now. They had come with a singular purpose, to ensure I never forgot the lives that had been lost. That I never escaped the guilt which was my due. Night after night they came, tormenting me with visions of their final moments. I saw through their eyes as the chandelier fell, felt their terror and pain as death claimed them. Their memories became my own, 100 different perspectives of the same horrific event. I was the mother who shielded her child with her own body, her back shredded by shrapnel. I was the elderly man pinned beneath a seat, slowly crushed as the crowd stampeded above him. I was the young woman who bled out in the aisle, a shard of crystal lodged in her throat. During the day, I was haunted by phantom pains, legacies of injuries I had never actually sustained. My back ached constantly, bearing the phantom weight of the chandelier. My hands throbbed where glass had sliced them open, though the skin remained unmarked. I began to long for death, for an end to the relentless torment. But the spirits would not allow it. Twice I tried to end my own life, only to have the pills knocked from my hand or the razor pulled from my grasp by unseen forces. They were not finished with me yet. Months passed in a haze of misery and guilt. I wasted away, eating barely enough to stay alive. When I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I hardly recognized the gaunt, wild-eyed creature staring back at me. I looked more like a corpse than the spirits that haunted me. It was in my darkest hour, hovering on the brink of madness, that an unexpected lifeline appeared. A letter slipped under my door, bearing the logo of the theater where tragedy had struck. I nearly burned it unread, but something stayed my hand. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy parchment. It was an invitation. The theater was reopening after extensive renovations, and they wanted me to headline the grand revival. My blood ran cold at the very thought. I crumpled the letter, hurling it across the room. How dare they? How could they expect me to set foot on that stage again, much less perform? It was unthinkable. But as the days passed, I found my thoughts returning to the invitation. The theater had been my home, the stage my refuge. For all the pain associated with that place now, I couldn't deny the pull it still held on my heart. And so, against all reason, I found myself considering it. Perhaps, I thought, this was the key to my redemption. A chance to face my demons and lay them to rest at last. Or perhaps it was simply that I had nothing left to lose. With shaking hands, I penned my reply. I would return to the stage one final time. The news of my imminent return sent shockwaves through the theater world. Some hailed it as a triumphant comeback, the conquering of tragedy by the human spirit. Others decried it as a tasteless publicity stunt, capitalizing on the deaths of innocents. I paid little heed to the discourse that raged in the press. My focus was consumed entirely by preparation for the performance, and by the growing dread that threatened to overwhelm me. The hauntings intensified as the date drew nearer. The spirits were ever present now, their accusatory gazes following my every move. They whispered incessantly, a constant chorus of laments and recriminations that threatened to drive me mad. Still, I persevered. I threw myself into rehearsals with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I would make this performance perfect, I vowed. I owed the victims that much at least. The theater had been entirely rebuilt, every trace of the tragedy erased. But I could still see it as it had been that night, the splintered seats, the blood-stained floors. Every time I set foot in the building, the memories crashed over me anew. My castmates regarded me with a mixture of pity and unease. They had all heard the rumors of my breakdown, my descent into isolation and madness. I caught them whispering when they thought I couldn't hear, placing bets on whether I would make it to opening night. I ignored them all, losing myself in the role I had chosen to perform, Macbeth, a tale of guilt and madness that felt all too fitting. As I delved deeper into the character, I found the line between actor and role beginning to blur. Like Macbeth, I was haunted by the ghosts of those I had wronged. Like him, I was driven to the brink of sanity by the weight of my crimes. And like him, I knew that my fate was sealed, there could be no redemption for what I had done. The night before the performance, I knelt before the spirits that haunted me. I begged them for the strength to make it through one last show. Whether they granted my request or simply decided to reserve their torments, I slept peacefully for the first time in 2 years. I awoke on the morning of the performance filled with a strange calm. Whatever happened tonight, it would all be over soon. One way or another, I would find release from my torment. As I entered the theater, a hush fell over the assembled cast and crew. All eyes were on me, watching for any sign of the fragility they all knew lurked beneath the surface. I met their gazes steadily, allowing none of my inner turmoil to show. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I paced in my dressing room, running lines under my breath as I had 1,000 times before. But try as I might, I couldn't banish the feeling of impending doom that pressed down upon me. At last, the call came. Places in 5 minutes. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The face that stared back was a mask of determination, all trace of fear carefully hidden away. I was ready. I made my way to the wings, heart pounding in my chest. As I waited for my cue, I became aware of a presence beside me. I turned to see a shimmering figure, one of my ghostly tormentors. But there was no malice in its eyes now, only a deep sadness. It reached out, spectral fingers brushing my cheek in a gesture almost like benediction. Then it was gone, leaving only a lingering chill against my skin. The curtain rose. I stepped out onto the stage. The bright lights blinded me for a moment, and in that instant I was transported back to that fateful night. I could hear the groaning of metal, see the chandelier beginning to fall. But I forced the memories away, grounding myself in the present. This was not that night. I was here to perform, to honor those who had been lost. I would not let fear defeat me now. I opened my mouth and began to speak, my voice ringing out clear and strong. The familiar words flowed from me, and I felt myself slipping into the role as I had so many times before. But as the play progressed, I became aware of a strange energy building in the theater. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an otherworldly presence. My skin prickled with goosebumps, though I was sweating beneath the hot stage lights. I faltered for a moment, the words catching in my throat. And in that instant of silence, I heard it, a faint whispering, audible even over the ambient noise of the crowd. My blood ran cold as I recognized the voices of the dead. They were all around me now, filling the stage with their ethereal forms. They moved through the other actors, who seemed oblivious to their presence. But I could see them clearly, could feel their eyes upon me. My lines became a litany of apology, the anguish in my voice bleeding through the character's words. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my guilt and remorse to the unhearing audience. The other actors exchanged worried glances, clearly unsure how to react to my unscripted emotion. But I was beyond caring about their confusion. My entire world had narrowed to this moment, this chance to unburden my soul at last. As I spoke the final lines of the play, my voice broke. I fell to my knees, overcome by the weight of it all. The theater fell silent, the audience holding its collective breath. In that moment of hushed anticipation, I felt a shift in the air. The oppressive presence that had haunted me for so long began to lift. One by one, the spirits faded from view. Their whispers grew fainter, until at last I heard only silence. I raised my head, scarcely daring to hope. The stage was empty now, save for my bewildered castmates. The spirits were gone, but had they truly departed, or were they simply biding their time? As the curtain fell, I remained on my knees, trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had done it. I had faced my fears and emerged, if not victorious, then at least still standing. But even as a fragile sense of peace settled over me, a nagging doubt remained. Was this truly the end of my torment? Or merely the eye of the storm, a brief respite before fresh horrors were visited upon me? I pushed myself to my feet on shaking legs, making my way slowly toward the wings. Whatever came next, I would face it. For I had learned that there are fates far worse than death, and I had already